Skype won't move out of in front of the chat box. Hey, look at that. Morning. Got our first guest. How's it going? Welcome to the Unity 3D game development stream. I'm Charles, your host from Infallible Code, and I'm here with Jason Story, a prominent game developer and ranter
Ooh,
in the
prominent.
Unity.
I like
For
it.
hell, yeah. Known for his rants about Unity 3D and coding, and he's got a couple games under his belt. So this is week 3 of our weekly game development stream. Thank you for joining in. If you're new to the stream, watching in a VOD or live with us now, we're basically going to answer some questions about programming, Unity 3D, game development, and we're going to do a code review today. I actually have one lined up. We actually have 2 more, I think, in Discord, so we'll see how far we get. So if you have any questions and you're here with us live, feel free to drop those in the chat. And if not, I love his rants. There you go. If there's no questions, in a moment, we will get right into the code review. We're having a pretty good discussion. Oh, my camera shut off. We were having a pretty good discussion earlier on Discord. If you're not a part of our Infallible Code Discord server, our community, feel free to hop onto that. There's a link in the description of this video. Also, I just dropped the clips from last week's stream on the channel, so be sure to hit like and watch those if you haven't already. All right. Should I make an MMO? Oh man,
I'm not taking that bait this early.
Yeah, it's too early in the stream. His mind is too clear.
Yeah.
Someone says, should I make an MMO? Yeah, that's basically, lately that has been the key rant that we've been hearing because we get a lot of questions about MMOs and how to make one in Unity. Can you make a tutorial on how to use multiple scenes in Spatial OS? Oh, another in the spirit of multiplayer, massive multiplayer online games. To be honest, I do not have any Spatial OS tutorials lined up just because there's the framework or the engine, the platform is still in its early days. So I'm kind of waiting for it to get to a better place, more stable place before I start working on those tutorials. But yeah, I mean, maybe. Thank you for the suggestion. I'll jot it down and take a look and see if maybe there's a room for a review or rather a tutorial on that. How should you contact influencers? What? I don't know. Am I an influencer?
If it's regarding the game development stuff, honestly, I hate to say it, but usually you don't want to. And I don't mean this in a bad way for either the influencer or for your game. But to tell the truth, the dirty little secret is a lot of influencers will charge you a lot of money to mention your game. Like, it looks very quick and sort of, hey, look, I'll just try this new game I had. That's thousands. That costs you thousands to get your game's name on the lips of anybody who's even remotely a popular YouTuber. It used to be people would do it for fun, but it's gotten to the stage that it's just not worth the money for most indies. What you do instead is you find yourself some sort of there's a marketing firms that are out there, and I know it sounds very gauche and people don't really like the idea, but people do this for a living. Like the actual getting your game out there is a trick that requires a lot of skill, and it's not just going to influencers. You're better off spending the $2,000-3,000 it would cost you to hire someone who's professionally involved in advertising your game, because at the end of the day, if your game isn't advertised correctly, you're not going to make any sales. And it may sound like a lot of money to say, oh my god, 2,000 or 3,000. Well, if you sell your game correctly, you should be making 30,000. And if you undersell the amount you're going to put into your advertising, your game doesn't get sold, and you don't even make 2,000. So it's a lot of money, but realistically, if you've invested 2 years of your life to make a game, invest 2,000 or 3,000 just to advertise it. And so yeah, don't do it yourself. Like, some people are really good at it, and you can learn how to, but then you're basically giving yourself another job. The long and short of it is, if you want an influencer to advertise your game, they have to want to. It has to be popular. It has to be like Goose Game. They didn't go and pay every YouTuber to play Goose Game, but they wanted to because it was a cool game everyone's enjoying playing. So you can cheat in some ways. Some of the influencer kind of marketers, they know people at different magazines. Or they know people at, well, I say magazines, I guess these days it's websites, but they know the people at Kotaku and stuff, and they can get the kind of bend the ear of the right people to get articles written about your game. And it's all about contacts. So don't bother reaching out. They're just going to ignore your emails. They get thousands of emails a day about which game to play. Instead, find someone, pay for someone to do this job for you with the right contacts and the right people, get your game out there and like invest in it, you know?
Yeah, my wife works for a marketing agency, and to your point, it is a whole separate job, you know, to be a marketer, and then on top of that, to be a marketer for a particular niche. Like the agency that my wife works for, they have their own particular niche that they fit into. But you're gonna find marketing agencies that are specific to game development, and they will have the connections, the contacts to reporters, to influencers, and just the right people to get, you know, your game out in front of the right eyeballs. So yeah, that's
Unfortunately, I
just
can't give you good names. It's not something I've been doing recently enough to know who the people are, but yeah, there's other people out there who are know this a lot better than I do, and I would say Google it, search for it, you'll find answers to your question. I
yeah,
just don't want to set you the wrong way.
yeah, and like you said, spending money. When you think about, you know, creating an indie game, if you're an independent developer, just because you're an independent developer doesn't mean it's all going to be free. I mean, you have to put capital into it. It is a business. I mean, you do want to make money from your art, and artists in any field, whether they be independent filmmakers or like our audience as game developers, you know, you're gonna have to spend some money to make some money, and unfortunately, spend some money to get your art out in front of the public. So it's just
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, for example, like if you go searching online, you'll find a lot of advice that says you don't need a publisher.
Mm,
And that's technically true. We live in a world now where publisher is kind of an arbitrary, meaningless job unless you literally need the money for certain things. Um, when people say that, what they really mean is you can market your game without a publisher. But the little asterisk there is you have to actually market your game. And the way they tend to recommend this is by social outreach. And the way you do that is you build communities. And you'll see this a
yes.
lot around starting games where they build a forum or a subreddit or something. And they tweet a lot and they get people engaged and they do the whole early access thing and they get people actively shilling for your game realistically for free. And that's something you can do, but you have to like make that. You have to make it community. You have to manage a community. You have to have social people doing that stuff. That is an option. The other option is you get a publisher to do it for you. Now, there's a lot of bad publishers. Do an awful lot of research. Do not just pick the first publisher to offer you money, but there are some really good ones, and they will basically they know how to market your game. So that's another option is you can go to a publisher, take the cut on the profits, but like have your game marketed correctly, so you will make something. So there's a lot of options, but don't slack on the marketing. It's kind of the go-to, right? Like there's think of all the time you spent making it. It's worth putting in at least a portion of that time into just getting people to look at it.
Yeah, and there is a difference between marketing and spam too. And I'm speaking from experience. You know, when I first got started with YouTube, I want to get my content out in front of a bunch of people. And so my initial thought is, well, everyone says to go on Facebook and Twitter. So what do? I take a video, I put it on every subreddit, Facebook group, and I include it in every Twitter handle I could possibly find. But you know, that's not the way to do it. The real way to do it is to genuinely become involved in a community, and it's hard. It does take a lot of time. Like I would say, months and months of investment to really make an impactful to make an impact for your game. You know, because you do have to genuinely be involved in a community where people care about your opinion, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, by the way, I'm making a game. You know, then there's going to be more true interest. Like, oh, I like, let's say Jason. If Jason, oh man, I'm sorry. If Jason announced tomorrow that he was
Making his
making
MMO, yeah.
got him. Yeah, everyone would be like, "Are you kidding me? You're seriously making an MMO, dude? You should put that on Kickstarter. You'd have some backers for sure. I'd back your ass." So there you
The
go.
MMO for people who hate MMOs, yeah. And by the way, I don't hate MMOs. Just as a asterisk there, I used to play a lot of them when I was younger. There's yeah, God, it has been a long time since I have played any though. I never played WoW or any of the big bad ones. I only played a few like Atlantica. What was the other one I used to play? Was it Spellforce? I can't remember. Either way, it's been quite some time. But yeah, not my not my sort of genre. I tend to play a lot more of actually, as pointed out in the chat there. Dungeon Keeper was my style of game, and then there's Soul Reaver and a few others back there. That was my kind of thing.
I used to love obviously RuneScape 2007 classic, but I used to play Ultima Online, which was pre World of Warcraft, and that game was my jam. But that's a game where it's like total nostalgia because there's a new one that just came out called Legends of Aria, and it's built in Unity, an MMO built in Unity. And I don't know, it might be independent. We gotta look. We
Interesting.
gotta check into that.
Yeah, yeah.
I was one of the early backers. Like I'm talking, I was a backer in 2016, and yeah, I mean it's come a long way. But you know, when I play it, I'm like looking for that Ultima fix, and it's just like it's not the same. Like I was at a different place in my life. You know what I mean? I just don't have the time to sit and enjoy it like I wish I could.
Yeah, these days I like time boxed experiences. I
Yep.
like bring out another Bioshock, you know? Just give me 8-10 hours of just solid entertaining fun, and then I can move on to something else.
Yep. All right. So you think we should take another question, or you want to hop into a code review? We can do
Yeah,
like a staggered. Like,
yeah, exactly. We can
all
do
right.
a bit of both. But yeah, I think we covered the basics on marketing. And as a
Yeah.
few people pointed out, publishers, yeah, they're pretty scary. Like they can ruin you, and there's people who will talk about that better than I will.
Mm,
I've not published a solo game myself as a developer. I tend to work on other people's teams. I'm one of those risk averse types that gets brought in for consulting and to write systems and scripts. But I have a lot of friends who've made games that are on the store you can buy that have given me a good round experience on stuff of how it works in terms of what's successful and what isn't. And yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to say on the issue. I would recommend looking at other people who have kind of more hands-on experience. Like Thomas Brush does a really good talk on
mm.
publishers, but he's the one who will say you don't need one, but they can be useful. Pretty much the kind of thing that I said here. So he's certainly more of a person to ask on that specific issue. He might even know names of good publishers that I wouldn't be able to recommend.
Yeah. I see a good question here that I think is, you know, before we jump into the code review, I think this is a good one to answer. Would you guys recommend making more smaller games, 1 to 3 months, instead of few longer games, 6 plus months? And I think that's he's talking
Yeah,
about development time, like one to
I
three
think we'll
months of
both say the
development.
same thing. So I'll let you go first on this one.
I would definitely suggest picking smaller projects, just because there's so much value in getting from start to finish. You know, I mean, I'm sure this is pretty prevalent in our, you know, game development community, and I'm totally someone who's done this. I love starting projects. You know, there's nothing like a clean Unity project where you're pulling in models, everything's clean, everything's under control, and then all of a sudden it starts to get to this thing where you're like, oh, should I add dependency injection? Like I'm adding a lot of classes here. Should I make a manager? And then to me, you know, that's where it's like, oh, this is kind of getting like the fun that I had of the novelty of a brand new project starts to wear thin, and that's where, you know, you tend to just kind of give up or just forget about the project or move on to something else, get distracted. So having projects that are 1 to 3 months, they allow you to see the end goal. And so when you get to those points, and they are inevitable, when you get to those points where the novelty of the project has worn off, and you're trying to figure out things that are just so tedious. Um, as an example, maybe you're like, oh, I want to localize my application so that, you know, it's in multiple different languages, or it supports multiple different languages. That's no fun. I mean, come on. You didn't become a game developer to learn how to localize your game, but it's just something that you're going to have to do at some point. So having a game that is short, the concept is simple, you know where the end goal is, it'll allow you to push through those moments, I believe, and get to the end. And the end of a project it's really valuable to see that through multiple times, because there's going to be so many things at the end of a project when you're wrapping things up, getting ready to publish, that you will never see if all you do is start projects. And I'm speaking from experience there.
Yeah, there's a million and one good reasons to pick smaller projects over bigger ones, and probably the biggest one is, as Charles said there, and many people will echo. It gets something out of your graveyard of incomplete projects. That happens all of the time, and you really want to avoid that. But even more than that, if you make a small game, it solves a couple of problems. One of them is it helps find the fun early, and I love that phrase, find the fun. I forgot where I read it first, but it basically means that an idea means nothing until you do it in practice. And you can do really quick prototypes, and you can make really small projects, and you can find a fun idea and then run it to the goalpost. Get it as good as it needs to be to prove the idea and move on. And that's why game jams are amazing. Do as many game jams as you possibly can. But basically, you make these small games. Not only that, they teach you how long it takes to make a game. I mean, I know that sounds kind of obvious, but like when you make a game, you can happily say, "I'll budget to spend 6 months on my game," and you'll blink and a year's gone by, and you're like, "Oh, okay, I guess I didn't." If you aim for a small game and then it doubles in size, you're losing less worry and time. And on top of all of that, if you work on smaller games, you know whether people like your game, and you're better conditioned to either decide to add more to it later to make a sequel to it or to branch something else. A big mistake I see a lot of people do is they'll make a big game, and even if you succeed in finishing your big game, you don't know that it's fun or not. And what's even worse is it could have been fun to start, but people think that when you release a game that it's going to match what you originally thought of, but you'll change your mind 10 times throughout the process. You'll come up with what the idea is, and by the time you hit the end, the mechanics will have changed, the characters have changed, the goal of the game has changed. It doesn't matter because as you play it, things will evolve. And if you make it smaller, you can weather those things earlier, and you can avoid one of the biggest dangers of bloat. So it's not just bloat in terms of adding features, but what happens is, and you'll see this a lot in sort of when a studio releases their first game and it took 2-3 years to make, they'll feel like there's a disconnect between the mechanics and either the art or the story or the general feel of the game. Because what's happened is they went in with the goal of making a fast shooter, and then by the end of it, it turned into a cover shooter because they added all of these cover and shield mechanics. And it's because as they're getting into the end of it, they're like, oh, I'll add this feature, and this thing is taking ages to debug, so I'll add this new feature. And then I've lost whatever the point of the story or game or goal was, and the game they end up producing will be probably, it could be for a different audience, or it could be more or less fun than the original starting idea. If you keep it small, you can remember what the fun of your project is and build to that and keep that fun and keep finding it. And you're not in danger of sort of turning into a game that you didn't start with. So small, repetitious cycles of games, and build a good portfolio. The more work you're going to get is the more project you have. And yeah, exactly. Feature creep is the kind of specific name, but it boils down to you want a large portfolio of proven good ideas, because gaming isn't just writing the code and it's not just building the project. Is it fun and do people want to play it?
Yeah. Yeah, and keeping it short, you should do that at a project level, but I believe you should also do it at a development level. You should iterate in small chunks and constantly get feedback from anyone who will play your game and give you feedback, because you know I think game development, it can be considered an art form in many respects. And the idea behind anything creative is that it's going to change. It has to change. You're going to have an idea, but as you go, things that you thought were fun in your mind are not going to be fun. And you may inadvertently add a feature to your game that is fun, that you hadn't even expected to be fun. And you have to be able to be flexible enough to iterate on that and say, well, you know what? I thought this was going to be, a cover and shoot game, whatever the case may be, but I like it better as a fast-paced shooter. So you have to be able to be flexible enough to explore that. And the way I think you do that is you keep your development cycle into short iterations. And obviously, I'm talking about Scrum and doing sprints. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very valuable to close that feedback loop and constantly give yourself the flexibility to change and maneuver and be more agile. Someone give me some corporate sponsorship money here. I'm promoting agile and Scrum. So great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that went on longer than we thought, but at least this was a collaborative rant. I didn't feel like I was screaming, because this is a topic I think is interesting and valuable, and it's not, I don't know, it's not something to complain at people for. I think a lot of people take it personally when you say, don't do this, don't make this kind of game, and realistically, it's more just weathered advice, Like, I don't want to feel like, I'm not saying don't make X game, all memes aside, what I really mean in most of these cases is you will cause yourself some harm in some way, shape, or form if you don't pay attention to the advice out there. And the main advice is small cycles, learn from it and grow from it. And if you do jump into a large project without the prerequisite experience, you'll just blink one day and realize you've lost years of your life on a project that may not go where you thought it would go, and it may not be as successful as you thought. And it's like, take a risk, fine, but don't put all your cards in one go and hope for the best when you can. What's the phrase? It's your luck favors the prepared or something. So prepare. Don't gamble with no experience. Build up to the point where you want to be.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, and I think this is in the same spirit, is luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So it's kind of like, if you're working on the same project, if you work on a single project, then the only opportunities you're ever going to get are around that single project. And obviously, there might not be any opportunities, especially if it's in a genre or something that a niche or something, a category of game that is no longer in fashion, and that happens. Some games are more fashionable now. Battle Royale games are really popular. I think they're still popular, but 5 years ago they weren't, and 5 years from now they might not be. So you might say, I'm gonna make a Battle Royale game. It's 2019. You get to work. Let's say you do make it and you do complete it, and it takes you 2 years, and you want to launch it in 2022, maybe 2023. Battle Royale games may not be fun anymore. So you prepared and you created this game, but now the opportunity is passed. By working on many different types of games and smaller games, you can get more out there. You're preparing yourself more because you're experiencing more problems and finding solutions to things that come up as you develop, and you're creating more opportunities for yourself. Like, I think we talked about this before. The guy who made Flappy Bird, he made like I don't want to say hundreds, but he made tens of mobile games that were just small.
Yeah, I think he's
games.
literally had, I think it was around 40, like 30 or 40. Like, it was quite a lot of games.
Quite a lot of games. And yeah, and it was just Flappy Bird happened to hit. I don't know why. No one knows why. He doesn't even know. What do you think about this, Jason? What do you think about developing really impressive vertical slices? And like, that's your thing. You're like, hey, I'm not going to make finished games, but I'm going to make a...
That's a great way to get hired, as opposed to a great way to make games, but it does work. Like, I think that kind of thing works great if your job is to basically do what we're doing now. If your job is to get a portfolio of people, like Mix and Jam is amazing. Like, look at Mix and Jam's YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's fantastic. They're basically,
channel.
Picking mechanics and making effectively mechanical vertical slices of games, and that's a great way to get people engaged in what you're doing. But one thing that, similar to what you were saying about a genre not being popular anymore, is one of the questions was thoughts on hyper casual games versus idle games, and that's a very good example of what you were saying. Idle games aren't popular anymore. They're definitely, they were a fad. I'm not saying they don't exist, but for a while, with Cookie Clicker being the predominant leader at the time, those kind of games really had an explosion where everyone would play them. And personally, not a fan, but I get why they exist, and but the point isn't so much whether I play them or not, or whether someone else does. It's what's their value as a product to make. And right now, there's not that much interest. It's more of a meme game more than anything else. But the opposite being hyper casual games, that's the opposite. That's currently super on trend. Hyper casual games are really popular. I think they're actually 3 of the top 5 on most app stores at the moment. I can't remember. But if you want to make money right now, hyper casual is the way to go. Really short. Find a engaging game loop, or as someone else also pointed out in the chat, steal one from an older game. It doesn't matter if you're basically effectively remaking Pong or remaking Tetris or remaking Breakout. Put a spin on it, add a timer, or change the rotational approach of it. Like, even if you just make it 3D, it doesn't matter what you do. If you can make something that people can latch onto for a few minutes and play one-handed, that's if you want to make games. I don't want to say cynically, but that's how you can be pragmatic about making money from games. So yeah, they're popular now, but again, just like everything else, they're not going to last forever. They're not going to be they're not a new genre per se, like people think they might be, but it is a new, it's a current trend that is a good way to earn money at the moment. So
yeah, it's interesting too. You can almost tell what's in style game wise if you watch a lot of YouTube videos and you see, sometimes you'll see like Udemy courses, like advertisements, and I remember seeing a Udemy course advertised that was for how to make a mobile game that was like, what was it called, like super casual, ultra casual?
Oh, hyper casual.
Casual, yeah. It was like, make a hyper casual game, take my Udemy course, and it's like, oh, I guess that's what's popular right now.
Yeah, no, I would kind of disagree with the idea that they're going to take over. And some people think they do, and that's fine. A lot of stuff is trending that way, but in the same way everything's trending to open world right now, there's open world fatigue, and we can all feel it. Like, as great as Breath of the Wild was, and as great as it is to have these giant open worlds, there's this pushback where people are just not interested anymore. And hyper casual is really good a while ago, and it's still got some legs. People still like them, but there's this sense of losing engagement with content, and people are getting very socially aware of the dismissiveness of social media. People are not engaging anymore, and there's going to be a pushback socially on that too. So if I was to put money on it, I would recommend leaning into engaging content games going forward. Maybe now do some hyper casual, but like if your angle is to make a game in 2 years' time, I'm going to bet narrative games and really detailed mechanic games are going to be what kicks off in 2 years' time.
And that's something to bring up. No one really knows what the next fad is going to be. There are people who have the pulse on the industry, and maybe history will sort of repeat itself, so that kind of can be an indicator. But you just don't know what's going to be popular. Who knew battle royale games were going to be as popular as they became? But the people who hit it first, like PUBG, was one of the first, I believe. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, it was definitely the one that popularized the genre.
Yeah, so I mean, the guy who created that game, Player Unknown, I guess. It's not like he knew battle royale games were going to be big, and he was like, "I'm going to capitalize on this." No, he just really liked making that type of game. I think it started as a mod, and then he was lucky. He was prepared, and an opportunity arose, and they just clashed, and boom, there you go. So, and that's that whole thing with luck. You just and creating smaller projects. The more experience you have making smaller projects, you just experiment, try different types of styles of games. You're going to be in a better position to take advantage of a fad if it does come up in the future. You can say, "Hey, look, you know what? This thing became popular. I actually made a little vertical slice about the same style of game. Maybe I can iterate on that, and then you'll be one of the first to hit a fad or a trend." So, just some food for thought. Not that you should go around creating games thinking maybe I'll get lucky and just blow up, but it's just something to consider when you're like, I'm gonna make the next battle royale and it's not gonna come out till 2025 or MMO.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's not even something that falls on indies. Literally, that's something you can see in the larger scope of the game industry. So many other companies are chasing each other's tails. Like, what was that one? Was it Sunset Overdrive that came out afterwards, trying to capture the Fortnite magic and sort of lean onto that, and it just died to death because it was too late. Like, the fad is over. You can't go and develop a game for 2 years and hope to be on the same hype train. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, definitely. I saw a question come up twice. I mean, do you have any more thoughts on this one?
No, I think that should cover it.
This is a more low-level question, just to bring it down to programming, just to keep it diverse. What do you think is WebSockets/REST suitable for Unity multiplayer games in real time? You should have some feedback on this one, Jason, since you're working on some APIs now.
Yeah, literally, I'm writing REST stuff at the moment. Now, granted, it's for more of a mobile app, so it's not really to the same sort of question. Unity multiplayer, I don't know. That's a tough question because it's kind of asking different things. WebSockets are great. I use them for lots of stuff. Mostly, I did a little bit with controlling hardware. Like, you can do some interesting stuff with creating really small packets of bytes and using it to do some also media players. There's a media player I use at the moment, which is Google Desktop Media Player. I think it's basically an unofficial desktop client for Google Music, and they basically use a UDP style connection to send data back and forth to control it, which is pretty cool. But for multiplayer, I don't know. Like, I'm not super familiar with what's currently popular in the multiplayer space for networking. But I just wouldn't recommend rolling your own. I would, like, it's one of those areas. There's enough research done. I'd find something that's more fleshed out than whatever you'd kind of cobble together with your own networking low level stuff. But all that being said, in general, using REST is great in Unity. I do it pretty much in every project I work on. It's always nice to be able to ping some service and store data and get stuff back. And there's multiple REST client stuff you can do. Everything from the native Unity web request. There's also the HTTP2 library on the asset store. You can even roll your own, which is kind of what I did for a couple of other projects. So yeah, I mean, Unity is not. You can do whatever you like with networking in Unity. There's a million tools. Like, go for it. It's great. Just specifically to drive your multiplayer, I'd find an actual networking solution for that. Because there's an awful lot of stuff to do with synchronicity that you don't want to be managing yourself. You're going to want something done for you in terms of managing the kind of what should be network traffic and what shouldn't,
Cool.
There is one question here, actually, that has come up a few times as well, worth mentioning. How do you mentor someone in computing or game dev in general? I do this a lot. I basically used to tutor at Coder Dojo, back when I had a desktop job. I worked in a bank, and I'd spend my free time teaching game dev because there's a nearby college, and they'd bring in the between the ages of 12 to I'd say 15, and we'd teach them Scratch and a few other different like JavaScript and a few other different things, similar style, kind of entry level programming, a little bit of JavaScript as well. So long story short, how do you effectively tutor someone in this kind of topics? In my opinion, it's engagement. You find something they enjoy, and that's why games are so easy to tutor people in, because basically give them a fun sandbox and let them play with it. So what I tend to do is I pick something like Scratch because it's so easy to get up and running, and you can just give something very quick code to play with. If it's more about how do you mentor or train someone in a kind of more technical capacity, then I always recommend challenges and tasks. So for example, I tend to direct people to Pluralsight. I'll be there to be on hand and answer questions, like literally now when people have questions, but I tend to not like hovering over people, because what you'll find if you tutor people in a one-to-one session, it can be very overwhelming, and you'll notice yourself if you're learning something. If somebody's basically sitting there going, "I'm here to answer all your questions," and I'm hovering over your shoulder, ready to answer and pounce when you have get something wrong, and it makes people feel very self-conscious. So what I prefer to do instead is I find resources I like, and that's why I tend to reference resources a lot. So, for example, if you click my name and go to my YouTube channel, I have a playlist of good resources on multitudes of topics. I tend to point people at that, and I say, here is stuff. I'm here to answer questions if you actually have questions on these topics. So, yeah, long story short, tell them to get a Pluralsight account. You handpick and cherry pick relevant topics that you want them to learn. You give that to them, and then you answer questions. And then when they're done and you're confident they understand the course material, you up the ante by saying, okay, can you take that and now change it to do this? And that way you sort of give them constant engagement and quick wins, you know? So there's a long-winded question of how I personally like to tutor people. Get them engaged in the topic, give them small wins they can do repeatedly, and move on to different areas with sort of branching out. And if you want to see a very good example of this, as mentioned in the previous chat, is Coding Train. And I'll type it in as well, because I know people have a bit of trouble understanding when I'm ranting. But Coding Train is a YouTube channel where it's just fantastic incremental steps of learning very complicated topics. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I personally don't work well under pressure. So, in situations when, if I try to put myself into the shoes of the individual I'm tutoring, I can remember back to when I was in university and being tutored, and it's like, it wasn't fun for me to be put on the spot like that. And it's funny too, because it's like you're in a situation where you're not expected to know, because clearly you're being tutored, yet you're still like, I gotta know this, like, why am I not fast enough? Why am I not picking this up? So personally, that's where I do agree with your approach, Jason, where you're just like, hey, look, do this task, and then we can talk about it afterwards. It's a low pressure situation, and I think that that's more conducive to learning. So, I'm providing resources as well.
And actually, it plays into another question added here is, what do you think the right balance is when asking for guidance and doing tasks when mentoring a junior? I think it falls into the same thing, right? Because if you put yourself in the feet of somebody who's in a junior position, that's working under you or new to a team, they're going to do their best to be helpful. They're literally going to be sitting there going, please give me work to do. I want to do it. I want to help. But truth be told, almost every time you do, they're going to be overwhelmed. And when you do that, they're going to be sitting there in their chair panicked going, I can't do the thing I was assigned. And I'm looking across my table at the person I'm working with, and they're really busy, and I don't want to freak them out and like take their time away. They're important and I'm not, and you sort of get really stressed about it. So you want to avoid that situation for both parties. You don't want them monopolizing your time by asking lots of questions. You also don't want them stressed out that they can't ask you questions. So this comes back to the same thing. I recommend giving them guides and other things to work on. Give them a Pluralsight course, let them play with it and work on that, and then be there to answer questions after they have finished the course. If they haven't demonstrated they've done the course, then they shouldn't need your attention, because the material is in the course. If you can be there to help answer the question from time to time, but that's the perfect mix of let them get a base level of knowledge, so if they completed the course and you have also completed the course in the past, you know what level they should be at, which is now a good place for you to propose relating that to your current project, or kind of expecting a certain level of understanding from them. So same thing applies, is be aware that they're probably either too afraid to ask you questions or they'll have a lot of questions for you. So give them something they can actually achieve that steps them closer to being better at helping you in what you're doing.
So you're saying do the course first before you commence the real tutoring?
Yeah, literally every course I've ever recommended, every Pluralsight course I've pointed at, I have completed myself. I've watched hundreds and hundreds of hours of Pluralsight. I've watched almost every course on C# they've done, right down to the learning C# and learning, equality operators and all the kind of entry level stuff. Because if I'm going to recommend it to people, I want to know what's in it.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. What do you think about before we go to the code review and just to jump off of this? What do you think about? Let's say you're tutoring a couple of individuals, bringing them together and doing like a game jam with them. Like say, hey, like no pressure on this game jam. We're gonna do it together, and just a bunch of people that you're tutoring. You ever thought about doing anything like that? I think it could be pretty cool.
I have, but there's a caveat to that. Just to be careful of is the unfortunate truth is people learn at different rates. And you want to be careful not to pair people to the point where one person's going to race ahead, one person's going to feel lost. So I personally don't like giving people a task like that, because what's going to happen is you're going to get people, one person's going to be really enjoying it and they'll say, no, I'll help, I'll rush, I'll get ahead and we'll do lots of stuff. And they'll end up having someone feel left out. Now, if you're very confident both people are at the same level of knowledge or similar, fine. But I usually prefer, what's a better idea is give them both the same task, then compare and contrast work afterwards, and then give them challenges relative to what they've demonstrated they can do. And if they seem to be on the same page, then you can actually do exactly what you said. They both did the task, they both did it to roughly the same level. Now you could say, okay, now we'll teach you about mob programming or even just pair programming. Let's get you working together. We'll give you a new task, and I'll act as a product manager, and I'll throw you curveballs with new changes, and we'll refactor it to do this, and then get them to work together and problem solving. Yeah. But yeah, it's a tough thing to start out with. You need to kind of ease people into working together, because that's a skill in itself. People don't realize absolutely. That you could be the best programmer in the world, but you've never worked on a team and you're brought into a team for the first time. You're going to have a very hard time working with other people. They're critiquing your code. There's code reviews. There's a sense of ownership of who has this. You don't want to be the guy who overwrote the other guy's code. It gets really messy, and you have to learn how to handle that.
Yeah, definitely. People don't realize working on a team, there's a lot of different personalities. Some teams just will never work together. Some people just don't work together. The personalities don't match. So that's a whole art and form in itself, trying to get people together and work effectively. All right, cool. So I think I saw someone say code review. So you want to dive into it? We've been going for
let's go for it.
40 minutes. So this piece of code, I just want to say who it was from Direxy on the Discord server. So let's give it a look-see. You see my screen there, Jason?
I can indeed, yeah.
All right, so we're pretty much looking at this for the first time. I did pull it up in Pastebin and just kind of gave it a glance. But I think the more of these we do, we'll probably come up with like a step-by-step process to looking at code. But just off the bat, I can see Ryder is telling me a couple things. You brought this up earlier. This call right here.
Yeah.
What does this blue line say? Repeated property access of built-in component is inefficient. That's that call to this.transform.rotation.
Yeah. Now it's not as bad as it used to be, so I will put a caveat there. So when they architected the kind of programming in Unity in the past, they wanted to simplify a lot of concepts. And so one of them is that Unity is built on a component model. So behind the scenes, you don't really think about it. When you see monobehavior, a behavior is a thing that exists on an object. And an object has multiple behaviors. And you kind of intuit this as you use Unity, but you don't really think about it as an object is a list of behaviors. And so what happens is every time you write an innocuous statement like .transform or .rigidbody or .renderer, any of them, you have to basically search the object and find the one that you're looking for. And so if you write this.transform dot, every one of those constitutes a small search. Now, it's not a big search, and Unity, if memory serves, caches some of these now. It never did before, but it's some of them they cache now. Transform might be one of them, and I'm not entirely sure. But to be safe, I still like to cache the transform before I do a lot of work on it.
I was going to see if I could.
I had to look myself. It goes to the C++, so you're not going to be able to see the actual see the call, fortunately.
Yeah.
And again, same goes for the camera. I think we mentioned that before. Camera.name, that is a horrible call to GameObject.findObject with tag main
Do we
camera.
have any of those in here?
No, I don't think so. But yeah, so it'll actually have to search for it. If it doesn't have the main camera tag, it'll throw a null exception, and if it does have it, you're still doing a search to find it.
Yeah.
So long story short, if you find yourself writing this.transform.this.transform.this.transform. Even if it's just in the update, put a transform, cache it once, and then use it for the duration of what you're doing.
So we should be able to refactor this. Let's see if I can do it in one shot.
There's also one other thing to keep note of. There is something called transform on the object, obviously, for that to be recommended. So cache it with the same naming convention of underscore or something to that effect.
Wait, okay, yeah, true that.
Right, on a side note, I like to see that there's underscores as a little tip for people who aren't familiar. That underscore is recommended is a indicator that it is a class scoped object. So it lets you know this thing is a property that exists on this class. So it's very useful to say this Django piece has an original position. If it's not using an underscore, it's saying this is a property I'm using internally to work with stuff to calculate some other value.
All right, so we successfully encapsulated that. I don't know if you guys saw that, but I was able to hit all 8 occurrences with one shot, thanks to Ryder. So that was nice. I think you've spoken about this. Well, first of all, I'm going to kill this comment because, come on, really? Come on.
Yeah, and by the way, for that, please go in and have a look at how to change the template that you can use for mono behaviors.
Yes.
So if there's, I had a video somewhere, and I think, I don't know, I'll link to it somewhere that you can even search online. You can change the template that Unity will use to generate new C# mono behaviors. So change that file and choose how you want it to look. Get rid of those comments.
You should make a video about that.
I have one from 2 years ago.
No. We need a 20. By the time I make it, a 2020 video, an update, a refresh. And that old video doesn't have my beautiful acting skills, so we'll see. All right, so what do you think about this? I noticed that he doesn't explicitly put the private modifier in front of these. I think
that's a different call. Yeah, I don't like it because I think, in my mind, every new word is another. It's a piece of information. It's kind of whether you're saying. Every keyword should add value, right? Every word you're adding is literally there to elucidate some point about an object. Mm-hmm. And private is telling you every single item in this thing is private, and that's fine. But it's an unspoken rule of everything in programming that it's private unless it's not. So you could, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Unless you code in Groovy.
Oh yeah.
Dude, Groovy, I'm not even kidding you. Everything is public by default. I mean, who wrote that language? I'm sorry. That can be a rant in itself, but
at least you got a rant this time. That's good.
Yeah, I mean,
even that.
Everything is public by default.
That's sorry. Yeah. So first thing, I don't use the pre-private simply because if you can intuit it, if you use the language, you know it's already private. So it's not adding new information. It's just more words to look at in your code. So the personal preference, it's not a be all end all. It's just I don't use it.
Yeah. Well, my personal preference is to be explicit, so I'm gonna.
Hands up! You're driving. And that's the other thing. As Charles makes a very good point. We talked about teamwork earlier. If you're on a team, pick a standard that everyone uses and stick to it. Even though that's not my personal style. If I start doing half of my code not using it and he's using it that way, you end up with a really horrible mess of confusion. Now, granted, you can have style cop, as was mentioned in the chat, as an option that'll automatically do this for you. But you don't want to get into this weird position where your code is being half written automatically by a style cop. Just, be a good citizen, as it's called, and follow whatever the convention is that everyone else is using. And so, in this case, we're using the privates.
I think style cop is useful, when it's like really obscure styling, like if you're on a team that's just like so used to writing like legacy code or something, and it's just as obscure, like, it's nice to have that just to kind of keep you honest. But yeah, you don't want to have to depend on that.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, I guess we're doing a lot of...
that's all pedantic. Like I wouldn't be too worried about the stuff we said up to this point. Here we're getting to our first actual worry, our first thing to really think about, and that would be our good friend here. Well, actually, no, we'll do one thing first, which is right now that little green line on the if statement. Before we get to that one, if statement, the green line. This isn't mandatory, but it's another bit of good practice, right? That's going to tell you can invert it. That's what that green line will say. So if you go over to that if and expand it out, it will tell you invert if, and it does this. Now what this does is it tells you that you had an if statement where there wasn't the else portion. So what you could do is it turns into a guard clause. You're basically saying, I can take this and I can just exit out because nothing else runs past this point. If this is not true, or in this case, if it's the opposite of what you're doing, if you shouldn't assemble, then ignore it. Don't do anything else beyond this point. And that's just a bit cleaner. It lets you exit sooner, and you don't end up with what's called cyclomatic complexity. And that's where you have multiple brackets deep, and all of a sudden you have to mentally kind of zigzag your way through your code. So if you exit early, you can work on cleaner code step by step, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, the guard clause is great. I mean, and obviously you want to make sure. So for me, having the guard clause in the update method, I always feel a little bit like, oh well, the update method you might update it later. You might change it later, and so the update method could do so much more that you can't predict because it's so generic. So I always like kind of. I don't want to say shy away, but it always feels like a code smell to me when I see it when I put a guard clause into an update. But I mean, I think in this case,
well, fun fact actually, bring that up. I do something about that myself, which is whenever I have a guard clause, what I do is I wrap everything else in the update and I give it a name. So I would in this case call this update assembling, or
like put it in a method, encapsulate.
And then you have a guard clause and then the function that's called, and that way you can very clearly see what would happen in the case of it hitting past the guard clause.
Got it. Cool. All right. So we'll probably end up doing that, but let's see what this thing does. Well, you wanted to talk about this, and I think that's pretty.
Yeah, this is the first one that everyone should really be aware of, right? And I say this a lot because I think we need to make a video on this, especially. I don't think people fully understand what a component model is and how it works. And that basically means a lot of stuff is happening magically by Unity to kind of do things for you. Least of all the update function. We haven't even gotten to magic functions yet. I don't even want to get into that right now. But this call in particular is well worth knowing because people don't think about it. But what that get component does, like I said, imagine you had a stack of books and you want to get a certain book, and someone said, "Hey, will you hand me that book?" And then the minute they say, well, they'll say, "Do you have this book?" And you would then search the list, get the book, and say, "Yes, I have this book." Then you put it back in the stack, and then someone says, "Can I have that book?" You would then go through it again, find the book, and hand it to them. You're doing the same thing twice arbitrarily. That's costing extra cycles. So whenever you call GetComponent, you want to store the value of that so you can get back at it easier. So you would remember where it is, and you can refer to it. So if you ever find GetComponent inside of an update loop, what you're basically saying is every time update is called, walk through all the objects, and then every time update's called, walk through the objects again. Now, some people might say there's only one or two components on this object. It's not that much of a walk. Well, there's one or two components now, and somebody might add more later. And also, if you've got 10 items and they're all doing a walk of only 2 steps, that's still 20 steps. You know, like you're massively scaling that as you go. So get component, cache them in your awake function.
Let's do it. Let's cache this baby.
And when Charles is doing that, I'll point out why I said awake function. So here's another interesting point. Based on the application model, they're using a state system, a life cycle that's very similar to, say, Android. And so what I mean by that is every single script starts with, there's a series of steps. And there's awake, and there's start, and then there's loads of them. I don't get to all of them, but the general point is awake happens, then start happens, then update happens. And what a lot of people don't realize is awake and start happen once for the lifetime of that object. So if we hit awake start, on enable, update, on disable, no matter if you toggle that object on and off, what happens is the start will run once, the awake will run once, and the enable will toggle on and off. So it's caching the data for it, and then it's using the data as you go forward. So what you want to do is anytime you want to use objects like this with GetComponents, you do it in awake. And the reason you do it in awake instead of start is every single awake call in your entire application runs before the first start call. So if you've got 50 scripts and you don't know which thing's going to initialize first and which variables will be set, what you want to do is you want to make sure that all the awake calls run, so all of your data is cached, and then the next thing to execute will be the start function. So do all of the logical bindings in awake, do all of your configuration in start. So, there you go.
Yep. All right, so I pushed that up. I was wondering why this was complaining. It's because it doesn't like that I called it rigid body. Like it doesn't understand that word. So
capital B. No, it's probably just a typo. It probably wants you to do capital
that's
B.
what. That's what.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I'm just gonna add it to my user dictionary.
Yeah, I did the same thing. You're not going to tell me what a rigid body is.
Yeah, right.
To answer the question, are there hidden components? There can be. Worth noting, transform is a component, so you've already got one to start with. But there's things called display flags, And so what you can do is you can actually have objects. And a good example of this is if you use any kind of hierarchy tool. So say you're installing Q Hierarchy or
Hierarchy Pro, which is
Hierarchy Pro, or I think even Master Audio, a few others do it. What they'll do is they need some object to hook into, so when your application lifecycle starts, so they will create an invisible object in your hierarchy and they will hide it. So it's actually there, but you can't see it. And there's a couple of others too. So you can actually write a script yourself in the editor, which will iterate through the objects and toggle all the visibility flags to make them all visible, if you're really curious. But for the most part, it just boils down to there will be some hidden objects as well. So yeah, that's worth knowing.
All right. Wow. Could you take a look? Oh, I thought this whole thing was the if statement. I was like, no.
Thankfully, there's something else there. So
let me
long story short, with all of that, we have, first of all, we've now cached that rigid body. That's a good start.
Yeah. So that's
we've
done some optimizations. But it would have been cool to look at the profiler to see if we could.
In fact, we need that as an example at some stage. We'll make a video that demonstrates the difference between calling GetComponent and update versus caching it.
It's pretty good.
So next up, one thing that's worth noting, line 32 right there is setting the rigid body to kinematic. That's fine, but keep in mind, right, with the whole lifecycle concept we talked about, update happens every frame. Now, this isn't a big deal. It's not going to cost you that much, but it is going to call that every single update. What you can do, if you're in control of that kinematic state, you're better off having some function call that sets that, sets it to kinematic or sets it not kinematic relative to what you're doing. It's a state. It doesn't need to be constantly updating. Now, I don't know the context this is in, so I wouldn't bother extracting it now. But just keep in mind when you're designing something, you shouldn't ever really be constantly updating something into a state that's a Boolean flag.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if this is even needed.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it is, because there's an enable physics method there. So I would say that probably isn't actually even a necessary call. But again, it's not going to break the bank. I wouldn't be too bothered.
Which, also goes into the readability of this code. It's like, what is this doing? Why is this here? There's no context, and I'm really big on self-documented code. I don't want to sound mean, but no offense to whoever wrote this, but if you're gonna write a comment up here over the start method that says this gets called at the beginning of the frame, why wouldn't something that's fairly obvious if you're a Unity developer? Why wouldn't you put a comment over this telling me what it does?
Yeah,
something that would
in
be
fact actually
unobvious.
I would even go one step further and say this is a bad idea, mainly because there is a function called setKinematic, which leads me to assume you can toggle kinematic on and off. And because this is being re-triggered every update, that's actually a bad idea, because what's going to happen is someone will say enable physics false there in the wait for seconds, and that'll immediately get reflagged back on. So enable physics, that's actually a bug, because if you do this enable physics, it'll immediately fail again outside of the other flag. Now, I can guess what's happening is if you scroll up, Charles, to the thing, the should assemble is meant to gate that. So the is kinematics only meant to fire as soon as should assemble, but that's something we have to intuit by going back and forth. When realistically, what you're saying is when that's true, is kinematic is true. So maybe that is kinematic should be in your should assemble function, because that's what the two things are intrinsically tied to. It shouldn't be part of the update.
Yeah. What do you think about this this log statement here?
Yeah. So yeah, one, don't log an update. Just a bad idea. But put it back for 1 second. I want to just point out a couple things. First things first, a lot of people don't know this. You can actually change it just print instead of debug.log. That's an inherent built-in function. Exactly the same thing. Just print quotes, exactly the same. Nice little shorthand if you're doing quick tests. But again, don't use it. I'm just letting you know it's there. Oh my God. All it does.
I didn't know it existed.
Yeah, I know. Most people don't. It's just at the bottom here. Don't use it though. I'm only telling you it's there because I think it's interesting. What else you can do? Here's more importantly. If you are going to do a debug log, it's oftentimes a hard time to find where that is. So write debug log again, actually, and we'll look at the autocomplete. So debug log, and you'll see there's a whole lot of options. But the one I want to really point out there is if you'll notice, if you go to the top one, there's an object context. And that's really, really valuable, because what happens is if you write a log and you put an object in there, a good example being literally this, what'll happen is when you get the log message and you click it in the console, it'll ping in the hierarchy. It'll turn yellow and you'll actually see it. So it not only tells you there was a log, but it'll tell you where in your code that log actually happened from. So usually you want to put the context in there for when you're logging it. But long story short, beside all that, don't use logs in update. You shouldn't use logs in update. And even if you are, we can get into stuff later, but you want to create your own logger and you want to be able to toggle all logs off in one go. You can even override the Unity logger, but I don't want to get into the complexities of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
So,
actually did a video on that where I did a log4net implementation, which that was interesting. All right. So I'm trying to figure out what this code does. I think it's a Jenga, like the game Jenga, where you pull the pieces out of the tower and it falls
yeah,
down. I think basically it's almost like at the end of the game when everything has fallen, it it sets like a flag to assemble,
to
and then
reassemble, yeah, to
and then it
kinematic
reassemble.
them and put them back together, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting that Jenga piece. So you think of a piece and what is a piece, and the only real functionality in here is that it's responsible for putting itself back.
Yeah, and
Or
realistically, what you'd want to do is you have that original position. You're probably better off having a call called move to position, and then in the Jenga tower, you'd iterate through all the pieces, and you'd tell each piece to move back, and then flag when he's done.
right.
Uh, but it's not a bad, like, it's a fine solution. The only problem is that because it's an update, what's happening is every single update, you're saying, move back, should I move back? I shouldn't move back. I shouldn't move back. Oh, I should move back now. Okay, I'm moving back. I'm moving back. Oh, we're done. Okay, shouldn't. It's just like think update is really happening relative to your frame rate. Whenever something's an update, think about the fact that it's doing a lot of work. Now, again, I know we're being a bit pedantic because there are should assemble flags, but realistically, you could have all of this code not in an update on the pieces, and then the only person who cares is the actual tower. Goes, should I rebuild? Should I rebuild? No. Okay, I will tell everyone to rebuild. All of a sudden, you've cut out every single piece doing an update. The only person who needs to update is the tower itself.
Yep.
So it's not a big deal performance-wise, but it's logically more sound to say give one person that job.
And what I think is important there is that in it being logically more sound, I think it makes more sense to a reader. When I think of a Jenga piece, I don't think that it's gonna crawl up and float up back into its own position. I would envision someone is responsible for gathering up all the pieces and placing them up, and that's where in modeling real life, I would model a manager or the person who's responsible for putting it all back together at the end of the game.
Yeah, usually you want entities to be kind of small enough and in charge of exactly what affects them. And things like movement, it may seem like that's the job of a single piece, but somebody else will pick it up. It's not really like it has no momentum or driving force. So
Yeah.
I do want to point out, though, as we go forward, we're not picking on this code. It's just a really good example of us to go through. It's the first thing we picked, and we're going through it very explicitly. But 90% of Unity devs I know kind of code like this. This isn't like there's nothing horribly wrong with any of what we're saying. These are just a few tips and tricks you pick up along the way. So we certainly don't mean to be complaining about it. This is perfectly fine code. There are just things you can do to improve it.
I want to thank Direxy for allowing us to for putting himself out there. It's not easy, and I don't want to think we're tanking on your code here.
Yeah.
Maybe I should give like a promo code or like some Unity asset to everyone whose code we start, so we don't feel so bad about it.
Maybe have some raffle and give off some assets, to anybody who, everyone who puts the code in gets entered to a raffle, and we'll give out the
give out like
prize to somebody,
like Console Editor Pro or something. We'll
find
exactly. A affordable
find
asset.
Find the bugs easier with Console Editor Pro.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool.
Right, so I guess other than that, I mean, kind of one thing you could do as well, again, we're kind of getting into semantics on some of this stuff, is all of that code that's running inside of that update function. As Charles said, he had to kind of read through it to parse what it's doing. You can just give it a name. If it's move back to starting position, make a function called move to starting position. Put all that code in it, and then there's no real illusions as to what it's doing.
Why don't we do that? Extract method.
Well, I'd take the whole lot, even the if else, because the whole checking if it's null and stuff. You just put the whole lot, just so that it's nice and very clear in the update,
Yeah. What's interesting too is we were talking about how there should be something that manages these pieces. If you look at the public interface, it has one called set assembly. So clearly there is some other script that knows about all the pieces and calls set assembly on all of them. So it's already kind of like positioned in a way that someone else is going to someone else knows when it's time to reposition. So all you really need to do is give that particular script some information about the starting positions, and then there you go.
Yeah. And you can even go one step further and have that tower build the pieces and therefore pass itself in, or you can have a manager class to do it. But it's all academic. I wouldn't get too bogged down with that kind of thing.
Well, because you can get cute and you can define different tower structures if you wanted to.
Yeah.
What were we gonna call this again? Sorry, set starting position, reset start.
Well, because it's moving
move
in an
to
update,
starting,
yeah, we'll say
yeah.
move to start or something like that. Move to starting position or something. Yeah.
Ta-da!
So it's a very small change we've done, but if you look at it now, it should be relatively clear. If you shouldn't assemble, just do nothing. Otherwise, move to starting position.
You gotta love Rider. If you all don't use Rider, look at this. It knows that we called this function in update, so it's telling me, hey, this is.
It's kind of warning you. This is called a lot. Maybe it doesn't need to be. Yeah. It's very nice.
All right, so I think for the most part, I mean,
well, actually, here's something. This is a very good one right here. So, another little known fact: if you look at line 65, especially in the case that this function is a coroutine, so it's being called frequently enough, that wait for seconds. So the trick is, right, I don't want to get into the whole big thing between declaration and instantiation, but you create a variable and then you assign something to the variable and then you use it. The key word to that is new. So whenever you see the word new, something is being physically newed up. It's being created. And in this instance, there's a new wait for seconds of a certain duration. Now, this is fine because duration is a variable being passed in every time. But a lot of people don't realize this, but you can cache that wait for seconds object. So if you're doing an update loop that's in a while loop or something, and it's saying while this, wait 3 seconds, keep waiting 3 seconds, do whatever, make a variable and return the variable. That way you're only creating the object once for the duration of all of the updates you're doing. Now, it doesn't make much sense in this particular context.
I was wondering if you could update it.
No, I think you have to set it once. But if this was a duration that happened, if it's always 4 seconds, don't write new wait for seconds 4. Instead, cache it and use the same one every time.
Yeah, it's cool. I hadn't really thought about that for these enumerators or the what do you call these coroutines?
Yeah, that's a good one. And actually, you'd be surprised how much performance that actually nets you if you're being very specific. There's also a similar one actually. You're bringing me up a good one. If you scroll up as well to the update function, another one. It's not important here because they're actually being interpolated, both values, the quaternion and the whatever, and the rotation, the quaternion and the vector. But most people don't know this too. There is a transform dot set position and rotation. So if you go underscore transform dot,
set position
and rotation. So what this does is it literally cuts your calls in half. So if you've got some code happening in an update where you're doing position and rotational setting, this will do both of them in one call. And it's again small performance net, but it's a very useful one to have if you're doing that frequently enough.
Has that always been there?
No, funnily enough, that used to be an internal function that only Unity had access to up until 2017. It was brought to the attention by the developers of Inside when they did a talk on performance issues, and they mentioned that that's a private function that should have been made public. And so I think they'd be announcing it on stage at Unite might have been the moment where Unity goes, okay, we'll make that one public.
Yeah, that's nice. Very good.
Yeah. But again, obviously in this case we're interpolating, so it wouldn't work for what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna do that.
Do you have anything else you're spotting there, Charles? Except for what bothers me personally, it's the Java naming conventions. I'm sorry, but you're killing me.
What's that?
Look at all the method names.
Oh, how they're like long?
No. Look at the casing.
Oh yeah, gosh. How come that didn't?
It's Pascal case there instead of
absolutely, yeah. That's
capital.
Awful.
So.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. Again, a lot of this stuff is nitpicking, but it's a matter of consistency. Someone else made a joke earlier about the bracketing formats, and I don't think he realized he was doing it, but Charles was fixing it as he went, which is So there's multiple languages have different patterning styles for brackets and stuff. Now it doesn't matter which one you use realistically, but if you work in a certain language, the people who are trained in that language will be more likely to use one or the other. If you work in Java, people are more likely to use Pascal case method names, and they're going to use is it kern? I always forget the names, but it's the bracketing case where the first bracket's on the same line and the next one's underneath. But in C#, people are more likely to use they're going to use uppercase or it's called capital case. I always forget, but they're going to basically use capital letter for their method names. It's just something to be consistent.
That's Pascal,
about.
Right? Isn't that Pascal?
No, Pascal is the starting letters lower, and then it's capital.
No,
going
that's
forward.
camel case.
You're right. Sorry, I'm completely wrong. Hands
Sorry.
up. That's Charles. I got this right. I'm
Oh
kidding.
my God,
Pascal case.
we got it on
You
film,
got me.
guys.
You got me. Ugh. Lost all my street cred. Right.
No, you gained a lot. Everyone's calling you a wizard in the chat. So. I'm just like removing these.
Yeah, they're not very helpful. These
I'm
kinds
just trying
of
to. Yeah, so I call this one start assembling, but it does actually. It shouldn't be start assembling. It's like set assembling status. I don't know what the heck would this even be called? Because it's true or false. I'm gonna do this.
I don't. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
I'm just curious about how this would look.
Okay. I'll let you drive for this one. I don't mind.
Start and stop assembling.
Actually, yeah. Sorry, if you're gonna do the opposing one, that's a good idea. So the reason Charles picked up on that one is he noticed there was something in there called a flag variable, and basically you want to avoid flag variables because what they basically say is this thing does X if it's a Y and Y if it's an X. You're basically saying do this if it's true, do the other thing if it's false. And what happens is you end up with this weird case where you'll have multiple ones of these, and you have some method with true, true, false, true, or something to that effect, and it makes no sense because it doesn't matter. What it does can be completely inverted if you change what the trues and falses do. So it's better practice to be very explicit and say, do this to start it, do this to stop it, and then you do the flags internally. And if you want to pass in a Boolean, you're better off actually managing that yourself. It's a small memory cost, but saying if is assembling, stop assembling, else start assembling. The power you get back from the readability of that for an entire team is far better than assembling true, assembling false.
Yeah. What do you think about this? Enable physics after timeout? I don't know. I'm just trying to make this make more sense from someone who's reading the code and like.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't say anywhere that this is seconds. You know, you're just like, well, I pass in a number. What is that? Milliseconds? Is it minutes? Is it?
Yeah, I know.
I think about all these things. I see this every day in my day job code. Then I'm just like, okay, what is it? What's the end? What does it stand for?
Yeah, that can definitely be a case of confusion. One thing I will say, this is a personal thing, point of contention. Some people may really hate this, but something I do myself. So this is do not take this as gospel or standard. Rename that function for a second, Charles.
This one here?
Yeah. Do a refactor rename on it.
You want me to do like a straight up? The reason I'm just calling it. I'm just typing it in.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It's not being called anywhere. So
well, in that case, put the capital C in the front of it.
Capital C like that?
Yeah, lowercase o.
Oh.
Just underscore. No, just underscore. Just do an underscore.
Oh, you do it like that now?
Just like that. That's how I always do it. I know. People aren't going to like this.
Oh.
But there's a very particular reason I do this. And the reason I do this is you should never call a coroutine. Because when you call a coroutine, what you're saying is this is a piece of code that needs to run in Unity inside of a start coroutine. So what I do is I use co_, for the actual coroutine, and then I make a function called whatever the name is. So I might have co_ enable physics, and then I will have enable physics. And what does enable physics do? It calls start coroutine co_ enable physics. And that way I decouple the fact that it's running a coroutine from the fact that it has to be ran as a coroutine. Again, personal choice, but I find it's much easier to find out which calls can be called directly versus which ones are meant to be ran as a coroutine.
I prefer, and since I'm driving, I'm gonna go ahead and do
it.
I prefer a pending coroutine at the end of it.
That's fine. That's
fine. I just don't like underscores in a function. It's just like it.
But the point's the same, right? We're both saying whenever it's meant to be ran as a coroutine, you should somehow indicate that it's a coroutine, because people will get confused when they run it and expect, it's not doing anything. Oh, I forgot. And you'll do this yourself. You will call a coroutine and go, why isn't it working? And you'll go back and go, I forgot to pass it into a start coroutine. So.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like it was being called, and I got lazy and didn't use the actual refactoring. Yeah. So it's all about being verbose, like what's one of my favorite quotes from, I think, Martin Fowler is any dummy can write code a computer can read, but it's hard to write code that a human can read, something like that. Yeah, you're writing code for humans to digest here, so you just want to make it as clear as possible. And yeah, coroutines are very specific to the Unity, and you would never use this function the way it's written in any other context. So yeah,
it's very, so like I normally don't like using any kind of prefix for things, but something like that sort of, it very clearly indicates it has to be used in a special case.
Yeah.
In the interest of making stuff read clearer as well, if you happen to be working with .NET Framework version 4 or higher, you have a couple of nice syntactical tools at your disposal to make your code a bit, cooler looking, which
Question
Charles is
marks?
going to demonstrate right here. Exactly, yeah. So
What's
this,
funny is if you do the automated code cleanup, it
mm,
gets rid of that. Or does it? Maybe not.
I shouldn't. I wouldn't think so.
It did it to me once or a couple times, and I was like, really? I like the, oh, whatever. I guess I was wrong. Or maybe they changed it. Who knows? Oh, no, look, it did it. What the heck?
Oh, interesting. That's maybe you've got your style sheet, your style rules set differently from mine.
Yeah, probably. I mean, look, format selection. There's three types: strict format, compact format, and spacious format. Yeah, if you do spacious, oh gosh, what do you think about? What do you think about that?
It depends how long it is. I don't hate it as much as you do, but it's fine. I can deal with that. Yeah.
I'll leave it like that for now. We're doing a compromise here. Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely am a fan. So.
Oh, look, someone asked, what do you think of using summaries? Are you ready? That's what I think of using summaries. I mean, if I was writing like an API that I needed some other tool to automate the creation of the documentation for, because a whole bunch of people were going to use my API, and I needed to make sure that they weren't emailing me around the clock saying, "Hey, what does this do? What does that do?" Sure, I'll use a summary, but only because using that summary will allow me to generate a nice little web page that has documentation. Only because I don't want to be bothered by people asking me what it does. That's what I feel about summaries. So, yeah.
Yeah, personally, I don't like. I know it's a cliche thing to say, but where do your bugs go? Bug tracker. Don't use to do tasks. Don't write yourself lines. Tell yourself what to do in your code. Where do comments go? Well, your code should be clear enough to read, and if it's confusing, you should have a document associated with it to explain what it does. At the end of the day, code is where your code goes, and you can put comments in. Some people are very, dogmatic about it, and I don't care enough. It's not evil to put comments in your code. It's not over, like people who say your code must be self-commenting. That can be a bit of a meme when people say that, but what they really mean is, in theory, in an ideal world, your code is clear enough to understand, but it's perfectly allowed in the context of something being confusing to annotate it. Good example of this is if you're using an algorithm that's not your own. If you're calculating some mass or some, you're doing something like, what would be a good example? If you're generating fractal patterns, you might want to put a comment over the function to do that, to explain what it is you're doing. Now, you could call it generate fractals, but you might want to put a piece of code in to say, this uses this particular algorithm. Things like that might be interesting to kind of help a team understand what you're doing. So it's the same with using constants. Like, for example, you can create a variable called gravity and use that throughout your code. But if there's certain kinds of constants which might not be well known to people, you might want to explain why it's needed in certain algorithms. So comments aren't evil. You can use them. But if you're commenting to say, this set health, this thing gets the health, or this thing sets the health, it's like, why are you writing that? If it should be called set health, get health, sensibly works. Comments should give you information that lives outside the scope of the code you're writing.
Totally agree. I don't know what I'm doing here. I went crazy on this refactoring. I was trying to get rid of all these calls to this. I was trying to be dry, but I think this is kind of overkill if you ask me.
No, it's fine.
I don't know.
I tend to do similar stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of like you say, did I misspell position? Wow. It's sort of like you say, like, how the private modifiers and how I like, it's like every bit of information you add to a class, every bit of code you add to it, it just makes it that much more you have to read and internalize. And I almost think like this whole generate random position function, that its only job is to provide a variable for the random force vector function, which is only used in this fling in random direction. I almost feel like it just takes away from what this Jenga piece class does. That's where I'm like, if I come in, I look at Jenga piece class, I don't expect to see generate random position or random force vector. Like, what the hell is that? I'm going to just be like, what is this person doing here? Maybe flinging random, you know what I mean?
I'm sorry, is the random position is still spelled wrong? I thought you fixed it.
Yeah, I gotta get right. No, I thought I did too.
You're killing me.
Come on now. Position.
As a small side note, again, we're not actually paid by Rider, despite what some people might think, but
I wish I
it
was
just
paid
happens
by
to be a
it.
very good tool to use. And one of the things that pops into kind of as a worth pointing out there is if you scroll up, one of the functions above is not being used, and I can tell that at a glance because it's grayed out. So on
Oh yeah.
63 there, you can tell, like actually all of these because it's just a single script that Charles copied in.
If we really
So in
wanted
this
to,
case,
we
it's
could
not.
do what is it? Add component menu. Is that the one?
Uh, it's context menu, I think is what you're thinking of.
Yeah, it is.
No, just context
Oh,
menu.
just context.
Yeah. So that's a fun one, actually. In fact, we can probably demonstrate that.
Yeah, I might as well take it full circle here.
So if anyone's never seen this context menu tip before, it's really, really handy. If you want to test your code, you can go and do a whole if input, get button down, fire one, run my script and test it. Or you can give yourself something to click to actually test a function. The kind of the long-winded way is you use a custom editor and make a button and go through all that jazz, but it's a lot of work for what basically boils down to, I want to run this code. And it's usually not a good idea to have an update call which just does a if button test code, because then you're baking in that test into the script when it's not really part of the script. Instead, you want to expose the ability to run that code without having to actually make a test. And that context menu, what it'll let you do is when you create an instance of the object and you have a script, you're actually able to run that function without actually having to create a button for it by just using the drop-down menu on your script.
I'm trying to make a Jenga piece here.
Keeping it thematic, I like it.
Dare I? Let me just make a material to make it look.
Oh
like
God, what are you doing?
At the very least, come on, man, come on. You guys don't want me to just have this blank looking block.
We're programmers. You're meant to have developer art. It's not meant to look good.
I'm gonna call my material wood, and then we're just gonna make that. Boom.
This is a very good question, and I want you to answer this first, Charles.
Okay, let's hear it.
What is your first best practice that goes out the window when you're in a hurry to develop something?
I don't write unit tests. That's kind of obvious.
That is definitely the first, I think, just because it's, in fact, there's a lot of projects that don't warrant the full unit test practicing. But on a more granular level, on a more practical typing code thing, let's talk about refactoring, for example. What refactors / conventions you don't do when you're,
I mean,
in a hurry?
you sort of saw me do it here. Sometimes I don't always use the shortcuts. I'll just like rename a function and everything will break, and I'll have to go through piece by piece and actually hand fix all the misspelled, method calls. But that's one of those things where it's like, I guess not everyone is a power user of Writer like we are, and so yeah, that's one of them. I can think of some more. What do you got? It sounds like you have.
My first one that came to my mind when I read that was how I bind my objects. Now we should cover this as a topic again someday.
Oh, you're talking about in the code there, like really deep into the.
Yeah. Like when I'm doing it the right way, I like to have providers. I like to have separate factories and things like that.
Okay.
When I'm in a hurry, I will do. Well, what I do is normally, I will put the requirements as children underneath it, and I'll call the GameObject.find. And it is a hierarchy tree walk, but it's a tree walk under a guaranteed subset of a few small objects. So it brings back the thing I said before. The component system, wherever humanly possible, I try to avoid walking the tree. If I can pass a reference into an object without having to do any kind of search to find it, it's considerably faster and more efficient than doing any kind of stepping through code. If I'm in a hurry, I will use GameObject.find and I'll use GetComponent. Only those two, though. I won't use findObject by type, and I won't use findObject in parent. Those things can lead to some weird scenarios. I'm not saying never use them. You might need them in certain cases. But when I'm in a hurry, I'll use either of those, or I'll use just a public field and I'll drag the reference in. So yeah, they're my like quick. I'm in a hurry. Just GetComponent everything. Just grab it. I don't care. I'll figure it out later.
Yeah, true. All right, I think I'm getting a little too carried away here, so I'm just gonna leave it at that.
One of the comments is the over-engineering starting, so I think you're setting a bad precedent if you go too far.
Come on, look at that thing. This is Jenga or what?
And I see you're going with gold bricks as well, so it's the fancy rich Jenga.
Yeah, I messed up my prefab here. What the heck? It's because I removed this. Whatever. All right, so what's the next thing? It has to have a rigid body too, right?
Well, first of all, show the component. We haven't actually gotten to that bit.
What?
The add component menu, the whole thing you were doing.
Oh, yeah. All right, so here you can see it's probably really small too. And shoot, let me move this over.
Oh, there already was two, actually. The assembly functions already had them. Didn't even notice.
What do you mean?
Start assembling, stop assembling. Did
No,
you
I
put those
added
in?
those. Yeah, I added those.
Oh, my mistake. Sorry, I thought
Yeah,
they were
no
already
worries.
there.
So we got fling in a random direction and start assembling and stop assembling,
Yeah.
which are the ones that we just added. Here,
So
I'll switch
quick,
back to the.
so quick and
That's
dirty context menus will let you test your code really quickly. Very handy, very useful for throwing things together. One of the comments there is, do you use camera.main? Never use camera.main. Do not under any circumstance use
You
camera.main.
can use it in the awake function to cache
You
the main
can.
camera.
So
but
the way I tend to do this, just actually make a quick script there, Charles, and I'll show you sort of how I personally favor using cameras in any script, pretty much.
all right.
So some test mono behavior, yeah.
I just can't help myself.
Can't help it. Okay.
Are we doing
So-
line awake?
What I like to do is, but first above that, just do a public camera. Call it cam.
I'm gonna call it camera.
And then inside of 12, there you go. Camera equals camera.
Dot main.
Nope, not yet.
Nope. Dot.
Camera equals camera and then space. Double do a null propagator.
Oh.
Camera equals camera. Just write camera. There you go.
Yeah.
And then
Are you putting me on the spot, man?
two question marks. Yeah, and there we go. And then write camera.
Yeah.
So it'll auto change it for you because it doesn't want you using the null.
Convert to conditional.
Convert conditional. It's the same thing. I personally prefer that
Oh,
syntax,
yeah.
but it's the same code. Effectively, what you're saying is, if someone using my script provides a camera to use, I will use that camera. If they have not provided me a camera to use, assume you're using the main camera. So that's my go-to. But
Why
there
do you
is
go public instead of serialized field?
well, yeah, probably serialized, private, whatever. It's fine. I just did it because it'd be quick, because it's not relevant.
I got you.
But yeah, if you're going to be really specific, fine.
My bad.
It'll be underscore camera, and it'll be underscore camera double question mark. So if you're going to do the whole exactly how I write it, then set it back to exactly.
Oops.
So that is literally how I would use camera references, and I would hide that warning because I don't care about it myself.
Oh no! By the way, I never use expression bodies for these event functions.
I try not to, because they can
I
be
don't like
confusing.
it. Yeah. Cool.
So you can hide the inspection for that, doesn't matter. But yeah, so basically the point anyway is the fact that you give someone consuming your code the option to provide an alternate camera, otherwise use camera.main, but you do it in a wake to cache it. Because if you actually call camera.main.screenPointArray in an update, you will be calling a find object with tag with every single call. Oh, and it's worth noting on that note, actually, in the hierarchy, if you can click the camera.
Mm-hmm. Let me move this over because they're not going to be able to see it. Yeah. Okay.
So
camera.
The words camera.main literally get the camera where that tag is equal to main camera. If you had that as untagged and you wrote camera.main.whatever, it will throw an exception. You'll get a null reference because it won't find it.
That's part of that magic that I hate.
Yeah, it's part of the invisible magic that confuses people. So it's not a magic function. It doesn't know anything, especially about your code. It's literally just finding the thing with that tag called camera. So be very careful using it. I only use it in the instance where someone else is not going to provide me one. And even then, I tend to check for null. But that should give you a good example of how to sort of use cameras in general.
Yeah. I'm putting this over here. All right. So if we're going to do this, it needs to have like a rigid body, right? I think. Right. Make sure. That's pretty much the only other thing it really needed.
Yeah.
Rigid body, yeah, transform. All right, so let's see if we can make this thing do something cool. Oh, and each one of these pieces needs an original position.
That should be cached on awake, right? Should be created.
Is it? Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. All right, cool, perfect. So do we have everything? Wait, no, I didn't update the prefab. Oh my gosh, I'm confused. I'm confused by this because my default's messed up. What do you guys think about my default setup here? I'm curious because I try to model it after using IDEs and Blender. All right, cool. So let me see here. Why isn't this updating? I thought I updated the prefab variant. Rigid body. Okay.
Require component's a good one. Someone brings that up in the chat. Require component is a cool script to add. A fun fact on that one as well, just to be very careful with the invisible magic. If you put require component on a script, while the script is already on an object, it won't retroactively require that component for you.
Oh,
So.
Oops.
Oh yeah, no floor, I think. Yeah.
What I just turn off gravity, right?
Just give it an actual floor. Give it a big rectangle.
Oh yeah, duh. I'm like, screw physics. All right.
Uh-oh, I think I
Plane
recognize
here.
someone in the chat.
Who's that?
That friend of mine, Nick.
Oh, nice.
So yeah.
How can I get a cooler accent like yours? All right, what am I doing? Plane. Boom. You know I gotta give the plane material now. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to.
Yeah, please don't. You'll kill me.
Alrighty. So, now what? I should just be able to move it? Look, I'm gonna play Jenga. Alright, so now we can go to one of these components here. I think nah.
No, just do one, because it'll kind of prove the point.
Alright, so we're gonna do start assembling.
Yeah.
Got a little glitching there.
Well, that's where the kinematic will have to set. They'll have to all be set to kinematic.
Fling in a random direction.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's
does
cute.
the job.
And then let's put it back, right? Start assembling.
Nice. Okay, so yeah.
Now can I do them all? Can I lock it and do them all?
But this actually highlights a very interesting point.
What? Did you see that? Wait, hold on, wait a second. I gotta do fling. This is cool, man. Look at this. Hey, the fun factor. I think we found it.
Nice. You have a game. But
what? Did you see that? Wait before you.
Okay,
all right,
nice.
We're good. Sorry. All right, go ahead.
But this brings up an interesting point that the first time you did that, there was a small bug, which was you picked one piece and tried to get it to return. But what was happening was it was bouncing off the other stuff, which were because of the kinematic thing.
Still kinematic.
So this kind of highlights the point. You may conceptually think of each piece as an isolated piece, but the task of building a tower requires all pieces to do their job. And so you'll inherently have a confusing issue where things will clip in and jitter off each other unless they're all kinematic when the build goes to happen. So that's like exactly like one piece coming back breaks the other piece. So that sort of proves the point that something like this should be in a tower object that iterates through, make sure everything's kinematic, and runs them all. Because if you do it on a single piece, you're going to get weird bugs like this. But I'm glad we didn't break it. I'm glad the code still works after we refactored and played with it. So.
Oh, well, that was never any question in my mind.
Of course, sorry.
I was crossing my fingers under the table. Oh wow! All right, well, that was great. That feels good. I think so. Let's do a little recap here. So we did some optimizations, right, by caching the get component and the transform. I sometimes forget that the transform is something you should cache.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about, obviously some formatting here, like just following C# standards, .NET standards of putting the curly braces on their own lines. It's a point of contention or conversation or discussion whether or not you want to explicitly put the private modifier. I'm for it. Jason's against it.
And of course, we got to talk about the fact that we have to use, which casing, Camel or Pascal, which I now know because I got
there. And the most important thing to talk about that is that if you're on a team, you should do whatever your team as a whole agrees on, because that's clearly the most important thing.
I will notice one thing cropped up during this, though, that I didn't get to cover that's worth mentioning. So if you're using the Unity engine.random class, you might occasionally hit a really weird scenario that might confuse you. And so delete that line, and we'll just explain the topic here, because this will confuse people.
Ryder did that for me, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty funny. So
what happens is, if you try to use random, there's actually two randoms. There's the random class, which lives in the system namespace, part of C#, and there's the random, which lives in the Unity engine namespace. So what you can do, traditionally, you can write Unity engine.random whatever to get it to work, but it's worth noting that they are different things. Yeah.
Yep.
You don't need to add the. Oh yeah, you're gonna instance.
We're just gonna do system. Is the system random? Is that one static? I forget.
No, it's the other way around. So system is the one that it isn't static, but the Unity one is static.
Oh, got it. All right. So here you'd actually have to. Well, you get the idea.
Yeah, but the point I want to get across here is that usually what you want to do is you're going to write Unity engine.random.range in most cases if you're to avoid issues when you bring in the system namespace. Or what Writer will do for you automatically, which is another thing worth noting, is you can use something what's called namespace aliases, and it's where you give something a new name. So a good example of this.
Here it comes. Just got to undo all this code. Ta-da!
Exactly, it's perfect. So what that does is it says, for the duration of this class, the thing called Unity Engine.Random will now be known as random. And you can do this for anything you like. So as a good example, you could say...
you can do it, and you can call whatever the hell you want to.
Yeah, and it doesn't just have to be random. It can be your own types as well.
You can't. Oh, whatever. You can't, trust me. I don't know what I did wrong there, but...
Oh, you spelled my name wrong.
Jason's random. Whatever. You get the idea.
Anyway, yeah. So just as an example to show you, you could write, say, like, go on the next line there, write using my vector equals vector3, or Unity engine.vector3, whichever. Because there's different ones. There we go. Semicolon. So now, every time you write my vector, it's as if you've written... No, this specifically, it's not a writer thing. This is actually a C# thing. So it'll work everywhere, even in Unity, even outside Unity. The only reason we mentioned writer is it'll do it automatically for you. If it knows that you're doing this with Unity, it'll do it. But you can alias anything you like. A good example of this that I use in practical terms in my code is if you're using an API, you might have something called a user. So you're consuming an API from the web that has a user, and in your application, you've got something called a user. And the one that you have has different properties and different things. So what I like to do is say I'm using a Google API and I'm getting their users for sign-on. So I will alias it to Google user, and then I'll have user in my class, and they're both technically called user. And the compiler would complain if I tried to use both things with identical names that go to different things. So instead, I alias it to something that'll be easier for me to use.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I noticed that too using APIs, that you're constantly, adding the model classes, and you're like, crap, what else could I call it other than what it is, what I'm getting. So, cool. Well, I think we done did it.
Yeah, you got a lot covered in such a small script, I have to say. I didn't realize that we'd be like nitpicking all of these small things,
This is great. Well, so, all right, those of you who came in through and are watching the VOD, feel free to join our Discord server. My camera just went off. Feel free to join our Discord server and drop your code off in a Pastebin link in the code review channel. So I think I need to think of a better way to do that, because for me, they kind of get lost.
Yeah.
So we need to think of maybe a submission.
Maybe people can post us GitHub links. Give the publicly make it, because you can actually just add a gist, GIST, and it's just a GitHub link to your individual files. So if you're using source code, which you should be using source control for your code, I should say, you should be able to give us a link directly to the ones you want.
So we'll think of a way to get these, like a nicer submission process. I mean, if you email them to charles@infalliblecode.com, I'll definitely see it. But we'll look in the Discord server before each stream and see what was posted in the week prior. So.
One of the comments is, do you use namespaces? And the answer is yes, always, on everything. That's 100%. Yep. That's probably a good thing to mention here too. So for people who aren't familiar with what namespaces really are, they're literally everything you're seeing here. Using system.collection, using Unity Engine, using random. These are all namespaces. And all that a namespace is think of it like a folder for a single script. But the difference is the folders distributed across your files. So everything in the same namespace all gets lumped into the same box. And when you give your code to other people, you're at risk of having collisions with their stuff. A good example of this being system.random and Unity Engine.random. Like, these are two different systems that exist in isolation that both want to have something called a random. And so it does you a service, and everyone else who uses your code as service, to namespace everything you do. And that way people know it's Jason's.random for everything to do with that particular thing. As for what you should use for a namespace, I usually recommend you name it based on the project, or you name it based on what the actual thing is, the concept. Yeah. Well, first I don't like the com myself.
Yeah, I don't like it either, to be honest.
I just use, like, literally, it might be Infallible code, or it might be, in this case, it would be Jenga system, Jenga game.
Jenga.
Whatever.
Jenga game. Yeah.
Yeah. That way,
I overthink it. To be honest, I'm really like, well, this is a game first of all, and it's in Unity. So Unity, and it's a game, and it's Jenga. Nah, you can just put Jenga. Here's an interesting thing to note too, if you guys are Rider users. This bothers the heck out of me. It'll be like, hey, did you mean project scripts? Was that what you meant?
I hate when it does that.
You can
or
go
assets.projects. That's right. Yeah.
A way you can do that is you can, in the actual Unity Explorer here on the left, you can right-click the folder, hit Properties, and you just uncheck Namespace Provider, and then it will no longer suggest that.
I didn't know that. What I used to do is I used to just turn off the suggestions for my namespace and say, I'll do my own namespaces. I don't need you to tell me how to do namespaces, Ryder. But that's probably a better approach because it does let it still autocomplete.
That's what I always do. I don't know why it says move to global namespace. I think there's another way to like actually say, hey, what you want the project to automatically namespace to. But that's what I always do.
And in the question of namespaces, it can be obviously a bit tedious to wrap every single script you write in a namespace. And this comes back to what we said earlier: make a new template file, make a new base template for your entire Unity instance, and every new mono behavior you create will have a namespace with your name on it and sort of cleaner functions. I will actually post the link to the old video I made, and I'll put it in the link in this description of this video.
I wonder if this will work. I just set the root namespace of this project in the actual, like, if you go to the
you're getting a bit dangerous here. I don't like messing with namespaces for that for whole projects, because you're going to end up getting collisions with odd stuff. But you're driving. I'm letting you.
The only way to learn is to fail miserably. I'm going to call this. It doesn't like Jenga because it doesn't recognize that as a word. Look, this computer. All right, now it does. Heyo, there you go. What happened? Oh, let me see if I make a new script. So Unity, go to scripts. I'm going to say add. I know there's a mono behavior here somewhere. Behavior C# script, test script. Hey, look, it did it.
Okay, nice.
Just something to explore.
Yeah, there you go. Well, how does Unity like that, though, if you go back to Unity?
Oh, that's a good point. All right, let me make it again.
I'm in agreement. I don't recommend using your actual name for your namespaces. I have done from time to time, and I usually do when I'm releasing it as educational material or something, just so that I have a reference and people know where to go to get more information on it. But if you've built a library for people to consume, don't put your name. Sometimes you have a company name you might use. Again, depends whether it's a product or something that people might want support for. But as a general rule, name it based on the project it is. So, for example, my company name is called Darker Smile, and I work with a contracting firm for producing projects called FirePanda. And so whenever we make work, I will prefix it with FirePanda.Jenga system, and then it would be our code inside of this particular project.
It's not complaining about it.
There we go. I guess we learned something new today.
Yeah. Until it blows up in your face.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I think this is a good time to wrap up the stream. We've been doing about an hour and a half.
I honestly think we got through an awful lot more stuff than I thought we would. So
we're gonna try. I think we're gonna try to make these code reviews a weekly thing, because they're been very. This was really fun and educational. So I haven't picked a day of the week yet to do these streams, but eventually, I think probably starting in 2020, I'll have a better idea of like, hey, look, it's going to be every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard. So keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, though, if you just follow me on Twitter, Infallible Code, and then if you're on the Discord server, you will get a ping whenever we are about to go live. So if we didn't answer your question, obviously save them, keep them in the tank. We're probably going to go with the format of starting the stream with questions and then hopping on over to like a code review. And if we have time, we'll go to either another code review or come back to questions. So you should do a GDD reviews. What is that?
Game design document.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's the potential. We'll see. Maybe this. Maybe if you guys can write a small enough game design document that is like really, really small, we'll just develop a game based off of your design document. Jason's like, hell no.
Yeah, you're on your own there, mate.
and then of course when we're done, you can take it and monetize it, and we're just your code monkeys.
Exactly. Yeah. But basically just free contractors.
Yeah. Right. Well, guys, thanks again for coming out, and we'll see you next week. For those of you in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays, and we'll catch you guys later.